hear about this this execution, and it had involved a boy hiding in this sort of lowland area in the water, a place that sort of seasonally floods and then becomes a kind of drier area for part of the year, and I just was so struck by some of the details about this particular episode, because I asked my father to explain to me what had happened, and so he gave me a version of it, and he explained that it had happened just before Durga Puja, that the mother of this boy had just come back from doing all of the shopping, and that she came back to the neighborhood, that she came and she saw the neighborhood had been cordoned off, that the paramilitary were there, and that her son had been located and told to come forward, and then he was shot in front of his parents and some other family members, which I gather was a relatively common type of incident at the time. But when I heard the story from my father, I think the reason it had such an emotional impact on me is that, because I could sort of picture it, because I knew the neighborhood and I knew the house, and I didn't know the people, I didn't know the family, I didn't know the victim of this particular evenings, but I was so curious, and I felt so humbled by my own ignorance about what it, I'm very ignorant in general about Indian history, and I always feel very ashamed of that, but I wasn't taught it. I grew up in America, and I learned American history until the very end of my schooling, and then I didn't study history in university, so my knowledge of Indian history remains very, very superficial. And so, but sometimes ignorance is good, because with ignorance comes curiosity, and with ignorance comes a sort of place where you can really begin to look at something fresh and say, well, what was this? And why was this boy killed in the way he was killed, and who was he, and what did he believe in to get him into this situation? So the whole thing I was able to approach in my own way. And I'm not saying that's a particular disadvantage or an advantage, but clearly I'm aware of my limitations in terms of trying to portray a period of history in this city that I really have no connection, I have no connection to that time. I was too young, I was removed, so everything had to come from either from books or from talking to people, from talking to my relatives, from talking to people like you, just to get a sense of, what was happening, how were people feeling, what was going on, and it's not meant to be an accurate portrayal. For me, it was, the book remains always the story of a family, and it's true that the story that affected me is a very violent story. It's a story of a young man being killed in front of his family. So the violence is a component of that, but along with the violence, the image that haunted me most was the confluence of the violence and the family gathered, and how that must have impacted everybody involved. And so it's both a family story. I think fundamentally it's a family story, as most of my stories are, or have been until now. But in this case, the reason it has this particular political historical background is that, I learned about this, and I simply wanted to know why it had happened, and that led me on this journey of trying to educate myself a bit about the period, and understanding a little bit about what had been going on.
There are some great moments of redemption, and one of those, and it's remarkable coincidence that you actually mentioned Hardy. There is that bit when you describe the flight of a heron, and the line that came back to me when I was reading it was one of Hardy's poems, Afterwards. He was a man who noticed such things. Yeah, that's the last line. He describes very minor changes in nature, what is taking place, and he says, when he's gone, I hope he will be remembered as a man who noticed such things. And that's the line that came back. I mean, that flight of that heron, and you have other moments like that woven into your narrative about that bird who lays eggs in the Tollygunge Club, knowing how those eggs can survive through the summer. Those bits of nature, how do they, descriptions of nature or observations of nature, where do they come from?
Well, I wrote most of this book. I technically wrote most of it in my house in Brooklyn, in New York, but I think most of it was really imagined, conceived in Cape Cod, which is a very beautiful part of the United States. It's on the ocean. It's like a peninsula, sort of, that on the northeast coast in Massachusetts. It's a place that's very dear to my heart, and the place where I really first began to feel like a writer, and also the place where the lowland was born, because it was during one of my father's, my father came to visit me for a week the year that I lived there, and in the course of that week I asked him for the first time to describe to me what had happened in his neighborhood in '71. And so it's all kind of bound up with Cape Cod. Anyway, so when I started writing the book, I was going to Cape Cod every summer, and as often as I could, to work in the studio of a painter, renting his house and working in the studio of a painter. I never knew him, but a very beautiful place, and a place that I found a deep connection to. And it's my time in Cape Cod is it's very different from my time in New York, obviously. It's a naturally very beautiful, very pure place. It's on the sea. You're aware of nature all the time. You wake up and the day is sort of controlled, shaped by very basic elements, the color of the sky, whether or not it's windy, if the tide is in or out. These are the things that shape your activities. Is the tide in or out? Do we go to this beach or that beach? Is it windy? Is it rainy? Do we stay in and read, or do we go out and take a walk? It's a wonderful place for me and my family, and I think that the more I went there, the more time I spent there, the more appreciative I grew of nature and the power of nature, and the importance of valuing and appreciating nature, because I think the older we get, we realize how temporary everything really is, and how, at least for me, the older I get, the more I'm deeply conscious of how precious life is and how fragile it is, and how we have somebody one day and the next day they're gone, and there's nothing we can do about that. So I think nature for me, which is something I unlike Subhash, who is, from childhood sort of obsessed and fascinated by nature, I wasn't particularly as a child. I mean, I appreciated, a pretty day, or when the leaves fell, or things like that, but I wasn't passionate about it. But I think my time on the Cape gave me, just opened that up for me a little bit. And I find it very reassuring, my connection to nature now as an adult, because in a way it is the one thing that endures, and outlives us. I mean, literature does too, I like to think. certain things do, other things do, but nature has a certain, you know, I mean, it has a presence that is, it has a profundity as well. I mean, the sea, the sand, the mountains, whatever it is, I mean, as witness to time, as witness to human lives. And so I think my time there, the fact that I was writing the book there, so many of the scenes in the book I imagined while walking on the sand, along the sea, thinking about the characters. Now, the book isn't set there at all. There's a tiny little scene set there, but the vast majority of the book is set either in another part of America or here. But that led me to think about the nature of in Daliganj also, and you know how that place was shaped, the physicality of that place, and how it changes over time, and how it also remains the same. And I think the idea of the lowland, and one of the reasons I call the book The Lowland is, you know, it's literally a place of absence and presence, right? Because when it rains, it floods, and it's one thing, and then the sun burns off the water, and it becomes another thing, and the presence of the water comes and goes. And I think, I don't think about these things when I'm writing the book. I really don't. But I think that now that the book is done, I obviously I was attracted to this. The idea of a place like that, an idea of a place that is constantly mutable, changing, because that has so many ramifications for my own life. You know, in a way, you know, my parents' relationship to Calcutta, to go back to our earlier part of our conversation, is a bit like that lowland. You know, they're there and then they're not there. They come and then they leave. You know, it's this constant cyclical thing. And nature is if nothing else, it's cyclical, and the seasons come and they go, and there's a kind of continuity, but there's a constant state of change, which I think as human beings, for me personally, I think it's very important to be aware of how nature works, you know, and it's precisely that continuity, that sense of the cycle, but also of time moving forward, and no spring being like the previous spring, but there being this idea of spring and rebirth and regeneration. And I mean, one can obviously think of many, many ways to talk about this. But.
You know, you have moved with ease from the short story to the novel, and you once described the short story to have a ruthlessly distilled quality, and now you moved to writing novels. Was it an easy transition? Do novels also have a ruthlessly distilled quality, or is it more open and rambling?
I like novels that are more distilled, but I also love novels that are all over the place and dense and layered, like Hardy's novels. Though Hardy's novels are very clean at the same time, though expansive. I think it just depends on the nature of the story and what the story demands. Whether it demands a kind of clean, precise, tight kind of narrative, or not. And then, of course, the writer has certain, some it's like some people are better at running a sprint, and some people are better at running middle distances, longer distances. And
well, you are good at both.
Well, I like reading both. And I think because I like reading both, I enjoy working in both forms. I don't like the idea of short stories being thought of as inferior, because some of the most powerful things I've ever read have been short stories. They're like poems. I mean, they're not poems. Poems are another category, but but I don't think of them as, you know, in any way diminutive, is what I'm trying to say. So if I can think of a story, I mean, I've said this before, everything is a story. And it's just a matter of whether it's going to be a short story of 10 or 20 pages or a longer, differently structured story of 200 or 300 pages. But I think of everything as a story in the end.
I think I've taken enough of your time. I'm sure there are other readers in the audience who would like to ask you a few questions. My only request is that please keep your questions brief. And also keep it a question. We don't want a critical commentary at this stage on what Jhumpa Lahiri has written. So, anybody? Yes, right at the back. Is there a mic? Is there a mic going around? Okay. You have to wait your turn. The mic is coming. Quickly, please. Taratari ektu. Sir, we can't hear you. No. Somebody look to the mic, please.
Is the Indian audience somewhat daunting for you because you've never really grown up in Indian culture here? Does the Western audience look at your books in terms of understanding Indian culture? What are the shades in between?
Yep.
I don't think of any audience when I write. I don't think of anybody. Writing for me, 99% of the process is a dialogue with myself and a form of meditation, if you will. It's an extremely private act, and even now, I can say, as someone who's written and published 4 books, when I sit down to write, I still feel the way I did when I was an unpublished writer, assuming that no one would ever read anything I wrote. And I think that's a very healthy place to be as a writer.
Every book is the first book.
Every book is the first book, and every book is written out of, for me anyway, I mean, it's a very complex question, and I don't mean to, I don't mean to make it simple, because it's not. I mean, obviously writing is, among other things, a need to communicate, right? But I'm not aware consciously to whom I am communicating when I'm writing. All I know when I write is that I'm trying to see something. I'm struggling to see something, to make sense of something, a character, a situation, whatever it is. And it's a great and burning question until I see through to some sort of answer that feels satisfying to me. And that is really how I would best describe what I do. And the day-to-day process is that, and it doesn't involve any awareness of who will read the book and where the person is from, to me, is entirely irrelevant. The person can be from India, the person can be from Peru, the person can be from anywhere. I mean, obviously, my books until now have been written in English, but my books have also been translated. So my books can be read by anybody. I find, I mean, any reader, the thought of any reader is daunting. I don't think, I don't write with any sense of purpose, you know. I don't write with any message. I'm not writing to explain a culture to anybody. I'm not writing to explain anything to anybody. I'm writing, as I said, to explain something fundamentally to myself. At the very end of the process, I have a small group of readers that I share the work with, people I trust, whose opinions I value, and I have them read the book. And it's a mixture of some editors, some friends, writers mainly. And after that, I just shut the door. And though I'm deeply grateful for the people who do read my book, the readers, for me, I cut the line there. I cut the cord.